Welcome to The Real Life Buyer. In this podcast, you will discover interviews with procurement and technical experts, business owners, entrepreneurs, and thought leaders. These experts will help you to develop and grow, accelerate your career, improve your business, save money, and buy smart. Now introducing The Real Life Buyer, Dave Barr.
Hello, and welcome to The Real Life Buyer. In this week's episode, I'm joined by Dr. William Attaway. William is a leadership coach for Catalytic Leadership, a company he founded to help leaders to intentionally grow and thrive. William has served in the local church ministry for nearly 25 years and is currently the lead pastor of Southview Community Church in Virginia, where he has served since 2004. William holds a PhD in the Old Testament and loves to read and speak about leadership, organizational change, and inspire people and teams. You may have heard of William through his books, the latest being Catalytic Leadership, released in January 2022. So today, I'm looking to discuss, obviously, catalytic leadership, introverts as leaders, and how leadership skills may influence the outcome of supplier relationships and negotiations. So without any further delay, I welcome William onto the podcast. Hi, William.
Hey, Dave. Thanks so much for having me on.
Absolute pleasure. We were just having a little chat before we started to record, and I've had I do mean this, the pleasure of reading your book during my holiday. I recommend that to any of the listeners here. It's a very easy book to read, full of lots of great stories and examples. And, it's one of those books that I said it was such a pleasure to read. It wasn't difficult anyway. Some books can be a little bit heavy, but I'd certainly say yours is not, and is highly recommended.
Appreciate that.
Oh, you're more than welcome. So it's great to have you on the show. Let's begin, if we may, by listening to your journey to become a leader of both the community and becoming an educator in all that is leadership.
My journey started when I was a teenager. I was 15 years old, and I had a high school teacher invite me to attend a leadership conference, my very first one. He saw something in me that I really didn't see in myself, and he wanted to develop that and see that grow and thrive. And so that's where my journey as a student of leadership began. I encountered my first role in leadership in business when I was 19, had the opportunity to lead a team of people. And that was taking what I had been learning for several years from so many leaders and putting it into practice. I worked in the business world for a number of years, and then 25 years ago transitioned into local church ministry, where I've spent, as I said, the last 25 years. My goal has been to take what I have learned, what's been invested in me, and to share that. And that's where the book and so much of what I do comes from as a coach and as an educator.
Fantastic. What appears to be different and perhaps a strength to your approach to leadership training is you customize your training to take into account the individual and their current state. So in other words, you create a personal leadership growth plan. Tell us how you are able to go about this. How do you form and tailor this at that kind of level?
The first step is that I listen. And that is a very, I think, underutilized leadership skill. We might give lip service to it, but we don't always practice it. And we have to start by listening. We have to listen for what is said and for what is under what is said. And that's what I do. I don't think there's a cookie cutter approach that fits everybody. I don't think I can give you a formula and say, just do these X, Y, and Z, and all of a sudden you're going to be a fantastic leader. It's based on your design, your wiring, how you are created. And that's what I do is I help leaders first begin to identify and understand their wiring, their pattern. And then once we understand and discover that, then we're going to talk about, okay, now how do we put that into practice in a way that's going to help you become the best version of you as a leader, not trying to copy somebody else. The danger, especially for young leaders, new leaders, is that we want to copy what we've seen. We want to copy somebody else that we admire or respect. And I get that. That's a temptation for all of us at the beginning, but you have to learn to lead as yourself out of your own gifts, your own passions, your own skills, your own personality. If you don't do that, well, you're just trying to be a bad copy of somebody else, and there's already one of them. The world doesn't need two. We need you to be you, the best version of you as a leader.
Yeah, absolutely. So you're taking into account the different beliefs, behaviors and such that individual has. And perhaps that helps to hone, shall we say, those areas of perhaps a little bit of weakness, and also recognize the areas of strength that can be there.
Absolutely.
So in your book, you've got 12 key principles that help leaders grow and add value. In one section, you mentioned 3 reasons for leaders failing, which is interesting for me to pick up on. So these being their ego, their inability to adapt, and that they stop learning. Talk us through your thinking here.
I think that the danger of any leadership role is that over time, we begin to feel like, you know what, I got this. I'm good here. At the beginning, there might be a learning curve where you're kind of scrambling, trying to figure out how to do the job, how to do what it is that you're supposed to be doing. But if you're in it long enough, you begin to feel like I got this, and you begin to coast. And that's a real temptation and a real danger. And that's the ego. I got this. I don't really have a lot to learn here. I can do this. I don't have to spend any time learning or being in a learning or growth posture. I'm good. Every time, 100% of the time, that coasting mindset will lead to mediocrity. It's a drift, and sometimes it's a slow drift, but that drift always ends up in mediocrity. Well, mediocrity doesn't inspire anybody, right? So how do we avoid that? And that's first is just being aware of the ego. Is being understand that, hey, this is a temptation for every single person. No matter how humble you think you are, every one of us has an ego. Okay, acknowledge it, understand it, and understand that drift into mediocrity comes from thinking, I don't have to keep learning. I'm good. I got this.
It's interesting you say that, because a lot of people see when they have their name on the door, so to speak, they've got their personal parking space, that they've done everything they needed to do to get to that level. And therefore they know perhaps quite a few of the answers. And as to touch on what you mentioned earlier on was the ability, should we say, the skill of listening. And if the person has such a strong ego that they are always right, they always have the answers, then I guess that's where the skill of listening perhaps starts to diminish, would you say?
Absolutely. If you are always concerned about the next thing you're going to say, that means you're not listening, right? When you're being silent and someone else is talking, this is not the opportunity for you to build your next statement or build your argument refuting what they just said or showing them how smart you are. It's to actually listen. It's to hear what they're saying, and even more, what's under what they're saying. And that's a skill. It's something that you can learn. And when you do that, that's going to help catapult your leadership far beyond anything that a title on a door or a name on a business card or a parking spot is going to give you.
Yeah, and certainly I'd say as well that the person that's trying to pass on the message recognizes that their input, no matter what it may be, is valued. Yes. And is considered. And if it's not either of those things, then perhaps they'll give up trying to pass on the message and just do what they're told, and they'll add no extra value to the situation. But do you think that's a true statement?
Absolutely. We have, as leaders, an opportunity, and I think a privilege, to pour into and invest in the people that we lead. And one of the ways that we show them that we value them is by treating them like people, not just cogs in the machine that do the tasks that we need them to do. The fact is, every person you lead is a 3D person. They have a life beyond what they do at the office. They have a life beyond what they do for your team or your organization. And when we begin to treat them that way, we begin to listen. I think some of the greatest ideas come from other people. I'm not the sole repository of every good idea in our organization. Not a chance, right? Some of the best ideas we have ever had were not mine. And some of the worst ideas we've ever had were mine. I'm aware of that. That posture, though, is one that makes me always listen and always be asking questions to try to understand and get a different perspective on what we're doing. By asking the right questions, you're far more likely to get the right answers. If you don't ask questions, if you don't listen, then what's going to happen is you're just going to think that you are the fountain of knowledge and everyone should come to the oracle and gain your wisdom. Well, good luck with that. I'm not sure that's leadership. I think you might have to call that something else.
Yeah, and I think another point to mention is that perhaps certain leaders ask questions and not really expect to get the answer that they're interested in. But they go through the process, the pretense, shall we say, of asking the questions.
That's right. They check the box.
Yeah, absolutely. And perhaps this blends nicely into the next question. In your book, you refer to a gift mix. So can you explain to listeners what you mean by this and how one may determine how we come about those mix of different things, which obviously you can explain now?
Yeah, sure. You are a sum of all of the experiences that have led to this point in your life. There is no such thing as a wasted experience. Everything has made you who you are. Every conversation, every job, every educational opportunity, every relationship, all these things have poured into the soup that is Dave, right? And the things that you have been interested in, hobbies that you've wanted to read about, skills that you've picked up at work, at different jobs in different parts of your life, that's all part of the soup too. Understanding what that soup is, what's in there, what is it that makes you you? What are your strengths? What are the things you struggle with? Understanding these things is understanding your mix, understanding your gift mix. Where do your natural gifts, your passions, your skills, your talents, where do all those come together? And where is your personality in all of that? The fact is, most of us are familiar with the Myers-Briggs personality profile, and we can look at this and we can say, okay, where are you on the introvert-extrovert scale, for instance, right? And typically we think of leaders, we can think of the out front, gregarious, high D on a disc, out front extrovert. Well, that's one type of leader, but that's not the only type of leader. And Susan Cain has done such tremendous work on this, on introverted leaders. Her book, Quiet, was a game changer for me. I think it's important to understand that you can lead no matter your personality type. You're just going to lead differently based on your gift mix, how you are wired. When you understand that, then you can lead from the place of knowing who you are and being confident in that and helping other people to understand who you are. Now, as a leader, that's not where you stop. You start there. You start by understanding your own gift mix, how you're wired. But as a leader, you have people that you are leading. What if you began to understand their mix? What if you began to listen and evaluate and help them to understand their mix, help them to grow and thrive? You think they're going to feel valued when you do that? You think they're going to feel like, hey, I'm part of the team. She actually see me as a person worth pouring into and investing in. I have something to contribute, feels like. Well, when we do that, guess what? Not only are we going to help them and lift them up, which I think is the job of every leader, but that's also going to help your team and your organization and your department because they are now invested because you invested in them.
Okay. Now, for some people, it can be difficult to determine, what are your strengths? You take things for granted, particularly of oneself. And you mentioned Myers-Briggs as a tool. Is that the right tool to determine your own personal gift mix, or is that something you need to have somebody from the outside, perhaps a mentor or somebody, help you to determine?
With many of my clients, I'll use different profiles. The DISC is a favorite of mine because I think the DISC is large and fluid enough that we can start understanding gradations inside of that and understand how different things play together and how they don't. Rarely is somebody a pure one-letter person. Right? Most of the time you're a blend, and we talk about how that works together. I'm a little unique in that I'm a high C and I'm really all C. And so on the DISC. And so that's a unique thing for me. But it also gives me perspective in appreciating people who aren't, who do have some fluidity and some understanding that, hey, they've actually got multiple pieces here. The DISC is a great one. Another one that I've really enjoyed the last couple of years is one Patrick Lencioni has come out with called the Working Genius. That is one I've used with our team and have recommended it to others. It's a way of understanding that every single person has an area or two areas of working genius where they are absolutely world-class if they invest in and pour into that and develop that. They have two areas of working competency where they're able to do some things. Okay, yeah, they can do that. It's not the thing that's going to fill their tank. It's not the world-class things, but they can do those things. And then there are two areas of working frustration where, you know what, I don't enjoy this at all. and knowing for every one of my direct reports in my team, I want to know where they are in that, so that I'm not just dumping areas of work and frustration in their lap day after day after day. Because guess what's going to happen? They're going to get frustrated and they're going to leave, or they're going to get frustrated and they're not going to do the level of performance that I'm expecting and that our organization deserves. So understanding their wiring through a profile like Working Genius or through DISC, these are tools that help me to lead them better and help me to lift them up and develop as leaders in their own right so that they can begin to grow and thrive. The fact of the matter is, nobody prioritizes your leadership development like you do. You decide how you want to develop as a leader. Ultimately, that's my responsibility. Nobody is waking up, given the best hours of their day, thinking, how can I help William develop as a leader? Nobody's doing that, right? But as a leader of a team, you have the opportunity to spend some energy and effort in encouraging that and investing some of your time into that. Time is the one non-renewable resource, right? You can always earn more money. You cannot earn more time. And when you choose to invest that in somebody else, that communicates value like few other things do.
Absolutely. Fully agree there. I'm glad you mentioned some of the traits of extrovert leaders. Obviously, you've been forthright, outgoing, very expressive, but the introvert leaders can be missed. And people don't often recognize an introvert leader, even though they're in a big position. So, drawing upon your experience, can you perhaps explain how somebody who is a little bit shy can position themselves to become a leader? Have you got any experiences, individuals you can draw upon to help that?
Sure. I'll draw on my own. On the Myers-Briggs, I don't think I can get any farther on the introvert side. I am all the way on that side of the pendulum. Well, for the longest time, I thought, well, that's a disqualifier for point leadership. That's a disqualifier for being the out front person because they're all extroverts. You know what I discovered as I continued my journey of being a student of leadership, learn as much as I can from as many people as I can. I will constantly be reaching out to people who are farther down the road than I am and offering to buy them a cup of coffee or lunch and plying them with questions so that I can learn from them. And you know what I've discovered? So many of the people that you think from the outside, looking at their highlight reel, that you think are these massive extroverts, actually aren't. They struggle with it too, because they think they're not as far extroverted as they should be. Well, very careful with that word, right? Here's the thing. You are wired. You are designed on purpose for a purpose. And what I teach leaders, what I help them to discover is, how are you going to take that wiring and leverage it to accomplish what you're trying to accomplish? Again, I could not be any farther on the introvert side, but by virtue of what I do, I interact with people all the time. How do you do that? Well, you have to understand an introvert doesn't hate people. Okay. That's a different thing. Okay? An introvert simply doesn't draw energy from being around a large group of people, right? That's not something that's going to pour energy into you like an extrovert. That's going to be more draining. And so when I'm in a large group, and obviously I have to do that a lot, when I'm in a large group, I can do that, but I have to build into my rhythm times to recharge my batteries, times when I'm, here, honestly, in my study, here, when I'm learning and growing and I'm spending time alone, that's when I recharge. And if I don't build that as part of my rhythm, I don't build that time regularly and intentionally, what I will find is that my batteries get too low and can get exhausted. That's the challenge, I think, for introverted leaders. If you're not intentional, you're going to have a problem. For an extrovert, you have a different challenge, right? For an extrovert, the challenge is that you're not prioritizing reflection. You're not prioritizing the inner work that's necessary for a leader. I don't usually have to spend a lot of time with introverts talking about that because they do that recreationally. For extroverts, they just want to hang out with people. They want to go to every party they can be, every gathering they can be at. But that time to be alone and do the inner work, the reflection, the evaluation, that's a little more of a challenge. Oh, can we do that in a team? Yeah, maybe. Let's talk about that. But understanding how you're wired and understanding that there is no one right leadership mix. There is no one right leadership personality. You can be a fantastic world-class leader no matter your personality.
Yeah, I think that's an important lesson for people to understand because I'm naturally an introvert. However, exactly as yourself, then I meet people every single day, negotiate every single day, talk contracts every single day. And people have an expectation that I want to be constantly out there meeting people and going, as you say, going to parties, things like that. And that isn't the case at all. So,
exactly.
So I think some people who are introverts should take stock that there's plenty of opportunity out there. Yes. And they shouldn't think just because they're a quiet, shy person, they're not going to achieve something great.
That's right.
So I mentioned there the word negotiation and suppliers. And what I'm keen to understand is how leadership skills can be used to affect and influence people and obviously, therefore, outcomes. Where do you or have you used your leadership skills to support the relationships you've had with suppliers and help to develop both a positive relationship and good negotiations at the same time?
The first thing that comes to mind with that in my discussions with people, my negotiations with suppliers, like you said, that the thing that comes to mind is that leadership is influence. John Maxwell has said that so many times. Leadership is influence, nothing more, nothing less. Well, how do you gain influence with other people? The best way I've discovered to do that is you listen to them. Not to keep harping on that one word, but that is a very rare commodity in our world. I was having a conversation with one of our vendors not long ago, and he said something that made me pause. And then I followed up with a question. What's that about? And he then proceeded to just open up. And our relationship changed in that moment. And all of a sudden, the ability to get what we needed for our organization from this person also changed. Not because I'm trying to manipulate him, not because I'm trying to say, what can I do to make him more amenable to what I want, what I need? No, it's treating him like an actual human being and saying, hey, he's a person. And here's a person who said something that gives me a bit of a moment. What's behind that? What's going on? And on the other side of that, what I've discovered is when you treat people that way, when you treat them as actual human beings, no matter if you're negotiating with a supplier, a vendor, a client, a customer, it doesn't matter. When you stop and you listen, when you key in on something somebody says or what feels like it's underneath what they're saying, you can have an impact that is outsized for what you actually think you're doing in that moment.
Yeah, fully appreciate that. I think I'd like to add and take your feedback on this. It's a joint process of both listening and making sure you understand the message.
Yes.
Because as you said, when people explain things to you and you truly get to go deep and really appreciate the understanding, the drivers and the behaviors that's making some of the statements they're coming across with to you, that can teach you an awful lot. Once you understand what their key drivers are, then you understand what the motivations are and perhaps what alternatives that there are to what they're trying to again, you'll make assumptions that they want X, Y, and Z when the reality means they just actually want A, B, and C.
That's right. It's about expectations. So often the frustrations and complications that we have relationally with other people are because of missed expectations. You know how you fix missed expectations in any relationship? Communication. And communication is not talking, it's listening.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, an area that is commonly expressed is that leaders are readers. And we talked earlier on about how important it is for leaders to continue to learn new things. Now, one of the things that occurred to me is that you quite often see book clubs out there, but I'd often see book clubs in companies, in businesses, that I'd often see a leader getting the management team together and say, hey guys, let's talk about this book in this next quarter. What lessons are there to be learned here? How can we apply them into our business, et cetera, et cetera? Do you ever come across that kind of function, the experience in other businesses? And if so, what's your impression of how useful and supportive is that to developing a business grow and the people within it?
I think it's a tool, and it's a tool that can be used poorly and will give you the opposite results of what you intend. I've used it for, decades now with the teams that I lead. We will read a book together at least once a year, typically 2 or 3 times a year, and we'll go slowly with it and we'll discuss it. And at the end, my goal is for us to have individual and team takeaways from that. Okay, this is what you said you learned. What are you going to do with that? Like, what's your action item? What's your next step? How are you going to take and apply this in your context of what you're doing? I do this with clients. I do this with the team that I lead. My goal is for this to be a tool that is useful to them. Now, I'll tell you, I have picked some humdingers of books that I thought were fantastic that no one else resonated with. Okay, that's the danger. It happens, say, you know what? Oops, I thought this was going to resonate. It didn't. But you miss all of the shots you don't take. You have to get in the game. You have to say, okay, I'm gonna try this. If you've never done this, if somebody's listening who's never done this, I highly encourage it. Pick a book that really resonated with you, right? And so many. I mean, there's just really such a plethora of books, and walk through it with your team. The idea here is not just to disseminate information. That's not the goal. You're not lecturing them. This isn't a classroom. You're facilitating a discussion about what are you hearing? The questions are what should prevail in the mouth of a leader in one of these groups, right? This is not the time for you to be the master teacher. This is not the time for you to be the fount of knowledge. You are not the oracle, right? This is the time for you to ask the right questions. Hey, what'd you learn from that? Hey, this chapter here, this really, I don't know, it felt like it didn't make sense. Did any of you get this? What did you get out of this? Hey, this one really stepped all over my toes. I feel like this was me. Any of you feel that way? What did you learn here? the questions that you ask and the environment that you create with the attitude that you're approaching it with and the words that you use matter so much with this. If the team that you're doing this with understands you're doing this for them, that you want to help them develop and grow as leaders, that you want them to develop so that they can achieve the goals that they have in their heart to achieve personally, sky's the limit. This can be one of the best tools you utilize.
Yeah. I'd like to think that it's something that can be applied at certain teams in businesses as well. There's so many management books out there. Just look at my field, obviously in supply chain logistics and so forth, that there's a huge range of books. And a lot of the books that are written are by people who have been in a certain industry, for example. And some of those techniques and behaviors, let's talk about retail, for example, don't necessarily fit in all cases with a different sort of business. However, there could be gems in there that you haven't looked at from your own perspective before, or a different perspective, and say, hey, is there something in this? Is this something we could apply into our own business? Has it got some legs? Is it worth investigating? Not everything will fit, and we shouldn't expect it to, but at least you've discussed it within your team, and hopefully there could be lessons learned. Even if it's a case of that's not right for us, that's still an outcome.
Yes. It's about the mindset. It's the attitude. What I talk to leaders about is you have to learn to eat the fish and leave the bones. Okay. You can learn from anybody. I firmly believe that. Sometimes you learn what not to do, but that can be incredibly valuable. That's a ditch I don't want to fall into. Okay, I probably shouldn't drive over there then. Okay, I'm going to stay over here. That's helpful to me. I'm not going to live long enough to make all the mistakes myself. I'd like to learn how to avoid as many of those as I can from other people's journey and their experience. When you help your leaders do that, when you help them learn to eat the fish and leave the bones, to discern what's helpful and what's not, what's applicable in our industry or our organization or our department and what's not, you're helping them to learn to think. You're helping them to learn to discern through these discussions. That's the ultimate goal for you, to help them develop. Because as a leader, is there anything better?
Yeah, I really like that comment. I've never heard that. Eat the fish and leave the bones. That's brilliant. I'm going to use that.
All yours.
I'm going to plagiarize that. Brilliant.
I often say that I've been using that so long, I have no idea where I heard it. But I often say the first 3 times I'll use something, I will make sure I give attribution. After that, it's mine. So
sold. Okay. Couple more questions. Keep an eye on the time. But one of the ones, or the difficulties I see, is that growth often obviously means change. Leaders are all about facilitating change and creating an environment whereby change is not feared or resisted, but is embraced by their people. Now, from your experience, what do you see as some great ways, behaviors, actions for a leader to create this environment where people actually look forward to and want to get stuck into making change happen?
I think it begins with the words and the attitude of a leader. If you are communicating verbally, non-verbally, through your words, through your actions, through what you avoid, through what you gravitate toward, if you are communicating that you don't like change, if that's something that you are communicating, even inadvertently, guess what? The people that you lead are going to follow that. If, on the other hand, you communicate, hey, you know what? Growth only happens on the other side of change, right? If we want to grow individually, as a department, as an organization, if we want to grow, that's only going to happen on the other side of change. The status quo doesn't get you there. If you begin to communicate that, then that's going to become part of the DNA of your team. They're going to get that. The actions that you take, the conversations that you have, the meetings that you are in, all of these things contribute to what you are pouring into the DNA, the culture of your team and your organization. As a leader, you have tremendous influence here. If you want growth and change to be a part of your DNA, a part of your culture, it starts with you. It has to start with you.
Yeah. It said people are very concerned when changes come along. What does it mean for me?
Mm-hmm.
Now, how is it going to affect my work day? How is it going to stress me? All those things come to the fore. And that's why I think it's so critical that leaders wholly believe in what they're going to do and make sure that people understand that they're driving this, but they're looking for support. They want their input. They want to have an outcome that everybody benefits. It's just not something that's imposed, because it's something they want.
Exactly. Whenever I'm going to introduce change in a conversation with a team or with an organization, this is something I'm going to have gamed out quite a while before I ever bring this up. And I'm going to try to anticipate every objection, every question, everything that somebody's going to say as a little side eye comment. I'm going to try to anticipate all of that. Because when I talk about it, when I communicate to them, I'm going to try to cut the legs off those things before they ever speak out. If I can do that, even with only 70, 80% of them, then I have spoken to the elephant in the room and I have called it out. And by doing so, I take away its power. I think that's one thing leaders don't often do. Sometimes leaders can get shiny object syndrome and, hey, change. Oh, fantastic. We should all do that. And then they launch it without ever processing through and anticipating what other people are going to think or feel about it. Well, that's a recipe for disaster. You've got to think about that. You've got to anticipate that. And you've got to address it in such a way that they know that you care. Yeah, I know this is going to mean a change for you. I know this is going to mean you've got to adjust how you're doing this or the paperwork you're using for this, or I know this is going to change your workflow. But let me tell you how this is going to help you. Let me tell you how this is going to help us. Let me tell you what the bottom line is going to do as a result of this. When you start walking them through this, you have to remember everybody's favorite radio station is WIIFM. What's in it for me? Okay, I start there, right? I start there and I'm going to address that up front. Let me tell you how this is going to help you. And when you do that, you really remove a lot of the tension and the stress from that conversation. Now, some people are just resistant to change. They're going to push back on it. It doesn't matter if you say, when we make this change, you're going to get $1 million every single day. They're going to tell you, no, I don't want to do that. That's going to change my life too much. I'm not interested. Okay. Some people are just going to be like that. Fair enough. You have to build that into your calculus. You have to understand that that's going to be part of it. But you don't want them to drive the discussion. You don't want that attitude to drive the bus. And that's where your words and your attitude have to be so measured, so authentic, and honestly, so well thought through, planned in advance, that you're able to have the conversation in such a way that you are driving the conversation and the bus. You're driving the attitude in the room. You're driving the culture, because that's what leaders do.
Yeah. And I think it's really important that people actually come out with some ways they believe, and I think the key word there is they believe, that the change will make their life better. And they should come up with those things. And perhaps the leader helps them to come up with the things that they as individuals may well see as benefits. I think when people believe there's a benefit coming, they're bought in. If it's imposed and this will result in this, well, I don't believe that, but I've got to do it because I'm told to do it, then you'll get a different reaction. So absolutely.
The days of sending dictates out through email or memos and everybody just blindly following whatever the corner office tells them to do, the days of that are in the rearview mirror. And I think that if we're honest, we have to say that's not leadership. That's something else. Let's not call that leadership, because leadership is about people. It's seeing people not as obstacles to what need to be done, but in fact, people are the point.
Yeah. Now, before we finish, I've got one more question for you, but there's an opportunity. How do people find out about yourself, your work, what social media you're on? What's the best places people to go?
You can go to my website, catalyticleadership.net, and find out more about the coaching that I do for leaders and for executives. You can connect with me on LinkedIn, William Attaway on LinkedIn. And for your podcast listeners, Dave, I would really love to offer a free copy of my new book, Catalytic Leadership. This is a summary of so many of the principles that I've learned coaching leaders for decades now, from my own journey and from theirs. And what I've tried to do is capture this in such a way that it feels like we're having a cup of coffee or a cup of tea across the table. And I wanted it to be very conversational. And so that's the tone of the book. I've tried to make it incredibly practical and helpful with the items and actionable things that you can take and do tomorrow. And you can do something with as you process through this. So I would love to make that available to your listeners, a free copy of that. If you go to catalyticleadershipbook.com, you can find out information on how to get that.
That's brilliant and very generous. Thank you very much for sharing that. I'll make sure that's in the show notes. So appreciate that, William.
Absolutely.
So one final question before we run out of time. One of the things that occurred to me is that we regularly evaluate employee performance. And obviously employees are trying to meet their goals. And there are some that are exceptionally good and they get a pat on the back and thank very much for their contribution and, off they go. Whereas those that perhaps don't perform very well, they're usually given lots of time, development, support, and coaching. Now, in some ways, that seems a little bit strange. Yeah, I can understand that those people need help, absolutely. But that same support and attention is not given to those people who have achieved their goals. Now, I believe there's something missing in that, because if they're achieving that without this support, what on earth could they achieve if they get it? What are your thoughts on this? And do you think it's the right thing to do is invest equally as a progressive employer with people that excel their performance as it is for those people who are struggling?
I think you're spot on. I spend so much more time with high performers on my team than I do with those who aren't. I'm going to invest in them at a disproportionate level because of exactly what you said. If they're performing at this level without individual help and coaching, if they're going to perform at this level, what could they do if I'm going to spend a little more time coaching them, investing in them, pouring into them? Well, that's only going to go up. Right? That's fantastic. It's not that I'm going to not spend time with people who are not high performers. I'm just going to choose to spend most of my time with those who are. And so that's what I do. And that's what I coach leaders to do. You need to invest in the people that you think have the most potential. That's simple in my mind, because they have the ability to change the trajectory of your team, your department, your organization for the better in a disproportionate way. That's how I'm going to allocate my time, which is the most precious resource I have.
Brilliant. Have you got any particular, obviously without naming names or anything, any persons or individuals in mind that where you've seen such a change, even they were great performers, your time and attention has made them blossom into something else? Have you got anything you could share with us today?
Sure. I can think of a number of people that have been a part of our team over the last, I've been at the current church where I serve for the last 18 years. And I can think of a number of people who have come through during that time. We're outside of Washington, D.C. It's a very transitional place. So people are here for 3, 4, 5 years, and then they move. And they're literally all over the world now, from Germany to New Zealand to Canada to South America, I mean, all over. And as I look at so many of their journeys, the time that I had the privilege of pouring into and investing in them and seeing what they're doing now, how they've taken what was poured into them and it has multiplied. It is the effectiveness, their effectiveness as a leader, their influence as a leader has multiplied in so many of these other places. It's not uncommon for me to get a note from one of them. I got one not long ago who just thanked me and said, hey, you invested in me, and let me tell you what is happening now because of that. I got to tell you, the leaders that I work with, the leaders that I coach, I encourage them to focus on that, because that's your legacy. That's the legacy. The people that you pour into and coach and invest in, that's your legacy, because they're going to take what you invest in, they're going to pass it on to other people in their sphere of influence. That's far beyond what any one person can do all by themselves.
That's brilliant. I think that's a lovely note to finish on today, William. It's been really interesting to hear your words, and thank you very much for sharing your story and your wisdom that you've gained over, this long period of time.
Dave, I really appreciate the opportunity to be on your show today and to have this conversation. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Brilliant. Take care, William, and have a great day.
You too.
So there's another Real Life Buyer podcast. I do hope you enjoyed it and it's given you some ideas and inspiration for greater action and achievement. If you are a purchasing or a supply chain professional, business owner or director, come and join my Facebook group, the Purchasing and Supply Chain Community Hub, a safe place to engage with like-minded, friendly people. See you soon. Bye.